Welcome, friends, to the Midnight Archivist. Tonight we journey back in time to a land where calendars weren't made of paper, but of water and stars. We're exploring how the farmers of ancient Egypt measured their year, not by the ticking of a clock, but by the eternal breath of the Nile. Long before the modern world carved time into seconds and minutes, life in Egypt flowed with the river. For the farmers who tilled its banks, the year wasn't a sequence of numbered days, but a great repeating cycle of nature's own making. Their existence was woven into the very fabric of the land, and their timekeeper was the mighty Nile itself. Each year, as the scorching sun beat down and the land grew parched, the farmers would turn their gaze to the pre-dawn sky. They weren't looking for a sign from a distant god, but for a familiar friend in the heavens. They searched for a single brilliant star, a celestial diamond that promised renewal. That star was Sopdet, known to us today as Sirius. Its reappearance after 70 days of being hidden by the sun's glare was the most important event in the Egyptian calendar. When Sopdet, the bringer of the new year, rose just before the sun, it was a celestial announcement. The people of the Nile knew with absolute certainty that the flood was coming. The great inundation was about to begin. This wasn't a moment of fear, but of celebration. The Nile, their life-giving artery, was about to awaken from its slumber. Its waters would soon swell, spilling over its banks and across the parched, cracked earth. The flood, called Akhet, would cover the fields in a rich, dark blanket of silt, a gift from the heart of Africa, turning the desert landscape into a fertile paradise. This was the first season, Akhet, the season of the flood. For the farmers, this annual miracle was a promise kept by the cosmos. They didn't count down the days or anxiously check a calendar. They felt time. They felt it in the subtle shift of the wind, the growing humidity in the air, and the rustle of the papyrus reeds along the shore. Time was a living, breathing force, not an abstract concept. Imagine the scene, entire families gathering on the riverbanks as the water level slowly, steadily rose. There was a sense of collective anticipation, of community. The fields, which had been worked tirelessly, were now given back to the river. During these months, from roughly June to September, farming halted. Instead, it was a time for other tasks. Fishermen cast their nets into the expanding waters. Builders and craftsmen worked on the great monuments of the pharaohs, and life moved from the fields to the villages built on higher ground. As the floodwaters receded, they left behind a layer of incredibly fertile black soil. The land was reborn. This marked the beginning of the second season, Pere, the season of growth. From October to February, the fields, now soft and rich, were ready for planting. Farmers would guide their plows, often pulled by oxen, through the mud, sowing seeds of barley, wheat, and flax. This was a period of intense activity and hopeful labor. The promise of the flood was now being cultivated into the promise of a harvest. The landscape transformed from watery plains to a vibrant patchwork of green shoots reaching for the sun. The air was filled with the sounds of work and the scent of new life. And finally, as the crops ripened under the Egyptian sun, the third and final season arrived, Shemu, the season of the harvest. From March to May, the fields turned from green to gold. This was the culmination of the entire year's cycle. Everyone, men, women, and even children, participated in gathering the bounty. They used wooden sickles with sharp flint blades to cut the stalks of grain. It was a time of immense relief and joy. The harvest ensured food for the coming year, payment for taxes, and offerings for the temples. After the last of the grain was gathered and stored, the land would once again become dry and cracked, waiting patiently for Sirius to return to the morning sky and signal the start of the cycle all over again. This three-season calendar, Akhet, Pere, and Shemu, was perfectly attuned to the agricultural life of ancient Egypt. It was a system born not from mathematics alone, but from deep observation and an intimate connection with the natural world. Each season was 4 months long, making a 360-day year. The ancient Egyptians were brilliant astronomers and knew their calendar was a little short. So they added 5 extra days at the end of the year, dedicated to celebrating the birthdays of their most important gods. This brought their year to a neat 365 days, incredibly close to the true solar year. Think about the profound wisdom in this way of life. Time wasn't something to be conquered or managed, but something to be lived in harmony with. It was a rhythm felt in the body, seen in the sky, and tasted in the fruits of the harvest. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a family might sit and watch the slow, steady current of the Nile. A child might ask, "When will the river rise again?" And an elder would answer with the wisdom of generations, not by pointing to a calendar, but by gesturing towards the heavens, "When the star returns." This deep cyclical understanding of time shaped Egyptian civilization for millennia. It fostered a sense of stability, predictability, and a profound respect for the natural forces that governed their world. It was a testament to their ability to listen to the earth and the sky, and to build a thriving society in tune with their rhythms. Have you ever wondered how ancient civilizations kept time? Forget the 4 seasons you know, spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The ancient Egyptians saw their year through a different lens, a lens shaped entirely by the lifeblood of their world, the Nile River. Their calendar wasn't dictated by the sun's position alone, but by the great rhythmic breaths of the river itself. It was a year of 3 parts, each a chapter in the epic story of survival, faith, and renewal. This cycle began not with a gentle spring, but with a dramatic and powerful event. Akhet, the season of the inundation, the great flood. Imagine a world transformed. From roughly June to September, the river would swell, breaking its banks and swallowing the surrounding landscape. The dry, cracked earth would disappear beneath a vast, shimmering sheet of blue-gray water. To the Egyptians, this wasn't a disaster. It was a divine blessing. They believed the flood was caused by the tears of the goddess Isis, weeping for her lost husband Osiris. The water wasn't just water. It was a sacred liquid, washing away the old and preparing the land for new life. During Akhet, the fields vanished. Farmers couldn't work the land, so life shifted. They would mend their tools, work on monumental building projects like the pyramids and temples, and strengthen the dikes and canals that would soon be crucial. It was a time of waiting, of watching, and of trusting in the gods and the river. The entire country held its breath, anticipating the miracle that was to come. Then, as the floodwaters began their slow retreat around October, the second season dawned. Pere, the season of emergence. This was the moment of revelation. As the water receded, it left behind an incredible gift, a thick, dark, and incredibly fertile layer of silt, rich with minerals carried all the way from the Ethiopian highlands. This black earth, known as Kemet, was so vital that it gave Egypt its ancient name, the Black Land. The contrast was stark, the fertile black land versus the Deshret, the red land of the barren desert that stretched out beyond the river's reach. With the emergence of this precious soil, a flurry of activity began. This was the growing season. Farmers would step barefoot into the still damp fields, their feet sinking into the cool, life-giving mud. They would guide their plows, often pulled by oxen, to break up the soil, and then cast their seeds, barley, emmer wheat, and flax, across the prepared land. It was a time of immense hope and hard work. The success of this planting season would determine whether the kingdom would feast or face famine in the months to come. The air would be filled with the calls of farmers and the lowing of cattle. It was a physical, tangible connection to the earth, a partnership between human effort and the river's generosity. The land, once dormant under the water, was now awake and breathing, ready to sprout forth the sustenance for an entire empire. Following the months of careful cultivation, the final season arrived, usually beginning around February and lasting until May. This was Shemu, the season of the harvest, or the dry season. The sun, now a powerful, almost relentless force in the sky, beat down on the fields, ripening the crops to a golden hue. The landscape, once green with new growth, was now a sea of swaying grain. This was the culmination of the year's cycle, a time for reaping the rewards of their labor. The entire community would mobilize for the harvest. Men, women, and even children would head to the fields with wooden sickles, their blades sharpened with flint. They worked together under the intense heat, cutting the stalks of wheat and barley. The air would become thick with the sweet, earthy scent of cut grain and the fine dust that rose from the threshing floors. You could hear the rhythmic chants and songs of the workers, their voices carrying across the fields, a soundtrack of celebration and gratitude. The harvested grain was then threshed, trampled by donkeys or cattle to separate the grain from the chaff, and winnowed, tossed into the air so the wind could carry away the lighter husks, leaving the precious kernels behind. This grain was the wealth of Egypt. It was used to bake bread, brew beer, pay taxes, and feed the armies and the builders. Shemu was a season of abundance, a joyous conclusion to the river's cycle. But it was also a race against time, to gather everything before the land became too parched, and the cycle began anew with the coming flood. For the Egyptians, this three-part cycle was far more than just an agricultural calendar. It was the framework of their entire existence, a physical manifestation of their deepest spiritual beliefs. Each season was a prayer in motion, a constant dialogue between humanity, the land, and the divine. The flood of Akhet was the tears of Isis, a promise of rebirth. The emergence of the soil in Peret was the gift of Osiris, returning from the underworld to bring life back to the world. And the harvest of Shemu was a celebration of Horus, the triumphant sun, and the prosperity he ensured. This sacred rhythm was meticulously observed and recorded. At temples up and down the Nile, priests acted as the nation's scientists and record keepers. They maintained nilometers, elaborate structures, often a series of steps or a marked column leading down into the river, to measure the exact height of the annual flood. These weren't just for practical purposes, to predict the success of the harvest. They were sacred records. The height of the flood was a message from the gods. A low Nile meant potential famine and hardship, a sign of divine displeasure. An excessively high Nile could be destructive, washing away villages and dikes. A perfect flood, one that rose to just the right level, was a sign of cosmic balance of Ma'at and promised a bountiful year. These stone columns, carved with sacred marks, became lines of memory. They told the story of each year, a story not just of how high the river rose, but of how well the people had listened to the rhythm of their world. Time itself was not a straight line, but a circle, a conversation written in water and stone. This deep, intimate connection with the Nile shaped the Egyptian psyche. It taught them about cycles, about death and resurrection, about the importance of order and the power of renewal. Their entire mythology, their concept of the afterlife, and their societal structure were all reflections of the river's predictable yet awe-inspiring rhythm. They didn't just live next to the river, they lived with it, breathed with it, and understood their lives as part of its eternal flow. The Nile wasn't just a feature of their geography, it was the heart of their civilization, the source of their strength, and the author of their time. The three seasons, Akhet, Pere, and Shemu, were the verses of an annual poem, a poem that Egypt lived and breathed for over 3,000 years. In time, the Egyptians sought to understand the rhythm that guided their lives, the great pulse of the Nile that gave them everything. It was a rhythm felt not just in the swelling waters or the fertile soil, but in the very stars that wheeled across the desert sky. High in their temples and along the riverbanks, scribes with reed pens poised in steady hands began to record the passing of the days. They weren't just counting, they were listening to the heartbeat of their world, trying to decipher its language. They watched the sun's journey, the moon's phases, and the silent, predictable dance of the constellations. Every observation was a question asked of the universe. When will the waters return? When will the fields be ready? Their survival depended on the answers, so they watched and they wrote, turning the fleeting moments of the present into a permanent record for the future. These were the first astronomers, the first timekeepers, their observatory the vast, clear night sky of the desert. And among the countless points of light, one star held a special significance. They called it Sopdet. We know it as Sirius, the brightest star in our sky. The scribes noticed something remarkable. Just before the sun would rise at the height of summer, Sirius would appear on the horizon for a brief moment, a brilliant flash of blue-white light heralding the dawn. This event, what we call the heliacal rising of Sirius, was not just a beautiful celestial occurrence, it was a promise. Year after year, they observed that soon after Sirius reappeared in the morning sky, the great flood, The Akhet would begin. The river would swell, its life-giving waters spilling over the banks to nourish the parched land. The star was a celestial messenger, a divine clock. The scribes saw that the return of Sirius, this harbinger of renewal, occurred with astonishing regularity. They counted the days between one rising and the next, and again and again. Through painstaking observation passed down through generations, they arrived at a number, 365 days. And so they built a calendar. But this was not a calendar like ours, marked by arbitrary months or weeks. Theirs was a calendar born of the river and the stars, a calendar of renewal. Their year didn't begin with the cold of winter or the blossoms of spring. The Egyptian New Year, Wepet Renpet, began with the flood, the moment when the land was reborn, when the cycle of life started anew. It was a calendar that perfectly mirrored the rhythm that sustained them, a testament to their profound connection with the natural world. Their measure of time wasn't an abstract concept. It was the story of their existence, written in water and light. They divided their year into 3 seasons, each lasting 4 months of 30 days. First came Akhet, the season of inundation, when the Nile covered the fields, depositing a fresh layer of rich black silt. This was a time of waiting, of preparation. Next was Pere, the season of growth, when the waters receded and the farmers cast their seeds into the fertile mud. The green shoots of barley and wheat would emerge, stretching toward the sun. Finally, there was Shemu, the season of harvest. The fields turned to gold, and the Egyptians gathered their bounty, a reward for their patience and labor. These 3 seasons, flood, growth, and harvest, formed a perfect, repeating pattern. After the 360 days of the seasons, they added 5 extra days, dedicated to the gods, to complete the 365-day cycle before the flood, and Sirius returned once more. To the ancient Egyptians, time was not a straight line stretching from a forgotten past into an unknown future. It was not a resource to be spent or a race to be won. For them, time was a circle, a great wheel that turned with the seasons, with the river, and with the stars. Every flood was a return, not just a repetition. Every harvest was an ending that held the seed of a new beginning. They didn't see themselves as merely moving along a line of history. They felt they were entering the circle again and again, participating in an eternal cosmic rhythm. Death itself was not an end, but a transition, a journey into another phase of this cyclical existence, much like the sun disappearing below the horizon, only to rise again the next morning. This perspective gave their lives a profound sense of stability and meaning. They were part of something immense, something eternal that had always been and would always be. Even now, thousands of years after the last pharaohs reigned and the temples fell silent, the wisdom of those ancient farmers echoes through time. It's a quiet wisdom, found not in grand pronouncements, but in the simple, profound act of living in harmony with the world around you, to live within the rhythm of nature, to trust the cycles of growth and rest, to watch the stars and feel connected to the cosmos. This is their legacy. They teach us that our lives, our seasons of joy and sorrow, of planting and reaping, are not isolated events. They are part of a larger, unending story. Each breath, each sunrise, each moment of quiet reflection is a part of something eternal. Their calendar was more than just a tool for tracking days. It was a philosophy, a way of seeing the world that found peace and permanence in the comforting certainty of return. And so perhaps tonight, as you begin to drift toward sleep, you can feel that same ancient rhythm inside you, the steady, calm pulse of your own heart, like the gentle flow of the river. Let your mind quiet down and imagine the deep, velvet black of the desert sky, filled with the soft, eternal glow of the stars. Feel the coolness of the night air, the stillness that holds the promise of a new day. In this quiet moment, you are connected to that same timeless cycle, the same eternal peace that the Egyptians found by the banks of the Nile so long ago. If you enjoyed this quiet journey through time, this gentle unfolding of history, you can stay with me for more forgotten histories, stories told softly under midnight light. I invite you to subscribe and join our small community of listeners, Together, we can continue to explore the quiet corners of the past. This is the Midnight Archivist. Good night.